Dr. Omar Ashour is a visiting fellow at the Brookings Doha Centre. Dr. Ashour is a professor of political science at the University of Exeter. He was in Tahrir Square last night as the announcement of the new president was made. Dr. Ashour, thank you for joining us on The World. Give us firstly a sense of the atmosphere there in Egypt. I understand the crowd has been dissipating somewhat slowly. How much unity and dissatisfaction remain?
It is jubilant. Until now, Tahrir Square is just behind me, and it's quite, relatively speaking, quite full. People are probably going to come back later for a second night of celebration. But there's also a realization that this is just a battle that was won. We did not win the whole struggle. The revolution continues. Many are sitting in Tahrir Square demanding that the constitutional declaration that was announced by the SCAF, by the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces a few days ago, should be frozen. It empowers the military establishment and takes away many of the powers from the elected president. They also want the parliament that was dissolved, that 30 million Egyptians voted for it, and then it was dissolved. They wanted it to be reinstated again. And there's a compromise now, or negotiations going on for a compromise between the elected civilian president and his group, as well as the vis-a-vis the military, the generals of the Supreme Council.
So where does Egypt stand constitutionally then? I mean, how much power can Mohammed Morsi wrestle off the armed forces?
I think at the moment it depends a lot on two things. If he maintained this large coalition that supported him, that includes liberals, leftists, Christians, women rights activists, and many Islamist factions, if he kept this coalition intact, that coalition has the capacity to mobilize the streets, to mobilize hundreds of thousands in Tahrir and other squares in Egypt. If he can do this and sustain it, I think this will put enormous pressures on the military. If he also sent the right signals to the international community that Egypt is not going to turn into an Islamic republic like Iran, despite having an Islamist president, if he sent this message quite clearly to the international community, I think many will support the transition, a full democratic transition in Egypt, which means empowering the elected president and empowering the elected institutions over the security services and over the military establishment. Until now, the negotiations are about the power ministries. The military want to keep the defense ministry, the interior ministry, the finance ministry, the foreign ministry, and the media and information ministry. In return, they say they will return 2/3 of the parliament and make runoffs for the one third of it. But still, it's everything can change again depending on the situation on the ground and how many people are sitting in and standing in Tahrir Square and elsewhere.
Now, Mr. Morsi's majority was very slim, by no means a resounding victory. What does he have to do now to win over the supporters, particularly of his opponent, who performed really quite well?
I think he did the right thing yesterday by giving this reconciliatory, very much accommodative speech, saying that he's a president for all Egyptians, regardless of their ideological affiliation or political affiliations or religious affiliations. He named every segment, almost every segment of the Egyptian society, from the taxi drivers all the way up. And he was very much reconciliatory in his speech. And I think if he keeps on keeping that coalition intact and giving his hands for the other side, which is by no means a minority, by no means a small number. As you mentioned, 48 or more than 48% voted Shafiq, and voted Shafiq mainly because they are fearful of the Islamist rise in Egypt. But he understands that the Muslim Brothers learned the lesson of the parliamentary elections. They lost significant support between the parliamentary elections and the presidential elections, and they don't want to repeat the same mistakes that they did the last few months.
Give us an insight into the character and values of Mohammed Morsi. We know he's an engineer by training. He's been a university lecturer. But he wasn't the Muslim Brotherhood's first choice. Does he have the sort of character to pull this off, to bring the country together?
He will try his best. He certainly has have the experience to do so. He was an MP under very adverse conditions in 2000 and in 2005. He was a member of the Guidance Office, which is the highest executive body within the Muslim Brothers. He has been a political prisoner for 7 months at an earlier stage, and he was arrested during the revolution for participating in the revolution. And so it was. He has very much a wide political experience, but at the same time, compared to the brothers' first choice, Khairat al-Shater, who's also spent 12 years in political prisons of Egypt. He is a wealthy businessman who knows as well, who can tackle one of the most critical problems in Egypt, which is the economy. One of the few candidates that got all the economic numbers right and outlaid a very sophisticated strategic plan for economic recovery. So that was their first choice, and now he's the second because he was banned. Khairat al-Shater, Morsi took over. Now Morsi has to tackle these issues, the economy and the security specifically. Those are very critical issues in Egypt. But moreover, he has to wrestle some powers from the military, and both the issues are related because the military owns somewhere between 20% to 40% of Egyptian economy. Their investment doesn't pay taxes to the treasury. They have preferential customs and exchange rates. They have land confiscation rights, so they can confiscate any piece of land and don't pay the treasury. So all these are losses to the Egyptian state, and he has to tackle that issue with them to be able to bolster the economic conditions in Egypt. But he also has to tackle other issues like their veto in high politics, their national security, dominance over national security, as well as the issue of granting them immunity over any corruption or repression charges.
Can I ask you, how much influence will the Muslim Brotherhood have? Because Mr. Morsi resigned from the Muslim Brotherhood in an effort to distance himself from the group, but there are still doubts, aren't there, that his experience with the group and his time with them, his ties to his old colleagues will loom large over his sort of policy decisions?
It will. I mean, this is a group that is quite intact, quite solid, and to a large degree they work together for a long time, so they're quite comfortable in dealing with each other. But the challenge here is to form a national unity government. He promised now to give a vice presidency to a woman or a Christian, and he promised that the prime minister, another vice president, will all come out of away from the Muslim Brothers and away from the Freedom and Justice Party. So he already gave quite a few promises and quite a few assurances to the youth and revolutionary movements that are non-Islamist and, to be frank, do not like an Islamist, the idea of having an Islamist president. And he will need that coalition, and he will need that coalition in his confrontation with the army and his confrontation with the security services, or what we call here in Egypt the deep state. He will need that to keep that coalition intact, and by doing so, he'll have to dilute his ties with the organization and become more broad in his choices for government and for vice presidency.
One of the first foreign policy objectives Mr. Morsi announced was to build ties with Iran to create, as he puts it, a strategic balance in the Middle East. What do you think he means by that? And does Israel and the US and Saudi Arabia, for that matter, have anything to worry about?
I think the foreign policy that Mubarak was pursuing is going to be, to a large degree, changed. He will probably he will enhance the relationship. He will use Turkey as his model in the sense of trying to foster good ties in the neighborhood, whether with Libya, Sudan, Saudi Arabia, but also Iran, and to try to keep the tensions at a minimum. You will probably see some tougher rhetoric towards Israel. The Muslim Brothers, obviously, the relation with Israel is not is quite a tense one. But he will try to keep that rhetoric at a minimum because he does not want things to escalate at the moment into any kind of a clash. It's still the foreign policy is not formulated fully. He still gives a double. Two-level game, if you wish, a game to his followers, more or less speaking strongly on these issues, and as you mentioned, talking about fostering better relations with Iran and being tough on the Palestinian question, but also to the international community, he gives another relatively speaking, a different rhetoric, which is more accommodative and more moderate. So the strategy in the end is not formulated yet. I think the military will have a big say in this because, again, national security issues and sensitive foreign policy issues and relationship vis-a-vis Iran and vis-a-vis Israel is their domain at the moment. And in that respect, they do not want any trouble in that area.